Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn here today. We would like to recognize that Nova Scotia is home to over 13 bands and 42 First Nation communities. We are in the traditional ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq, known as the Mi'kma'ki. As treaty people, we're committed to reconciliation. We'd like to recognize that Nova Scotia is home to over 50 African Nova Scotian communities whose culture, heritage, and histories have been and remain a key part of this province for more than 400 years. We honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came before us to this land. Today, we have a very exciting conversation, a lunch and learn here today. We have Erin Casey, who is here with us. Erin is a plain language expert on a crusade to make words and communication more accessible for all users. And today's topic, she's going to be discussing autism and neurodivergence. Little changes mean a lot. What is neurodivergence and how can you offer better customer service to people who are autistic or have ADHD and have other neurological differences? Erin will share tips and advice for small shifts that can make a big difference for folks with a variety of brains. And today's Lunch and Learn is also funded by the Accessibility Directorate. So I will pass this on to Erin.
Hi. Okay, I'm really sorry, but he's actually cutting tiles right now, so you might hear that from time to time. Can you hear it?
No.
Oh, good. Oh, thank God. All right, because I sure can. All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Oh, hi, Rachel. Tracy, we have a gang in Guysborough. So nice to see everyone. And so I didn't do a PowerPoint or anything today. I'm just going to talk because this is something I talk about a lot. And this might be a little bit like having a drink from a fire hose. So just bear with me and I'll pause at different points to answer questions if people want to ask questions. And neurodivergence in general and autism and ADHD and other brain differences there's quite a wide range of understanding. You know, some of us are familiar and have family members, or we ourselves may be neurodivergent, and for other people, this may be a completely new topic. So no silly questions, and I'm happy to talk about whatever comes up for you. So Roxanne gave me a little introduction, and most of you know me anyway, but today I probably have a more personal hat on. So I'm a parent of two young adults who are autistic. So my son is 24 and my other child is 21, non-binary human being, and is still, my son's out and about and adulting, and my younger child still lives with me. So both are autistic. And so I think this is Autism Acceptance Day today. I don't love that term, and I hear other things like Neurodiversity Celebration Week or month. I think we can probably do better than acceptance. And this morning I came downstairs and B, my kid said to me, I just in a very serious voice said, good morning, Mom. I just want you to know that today you have to accept me. And I said, well, yes, I do accept you. Certainly I do. So every week is Neurodiversity Celebration Week in my house. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today comes from my own personal experience, but it is my personal experience, and other people may have and do other kinds of experiences around these topics. So I will speak from what I know and what I've learned over the years, and I'm sure other people will have things to add as well. So I'm going to talk about autism in general and neurodivergence, and how you might, welcome and accommodate autistic folks and other neurodivergent folks as both colleagues and or customers and clients and citizens. And I already talked a little bit about my own perspective on this and, where I'm coming from, but certainly in recent years, particularly the last 5 years, neurodivergence and autism have become quite politicized. People are quite passionate about different, topics and issues related to autism and neurodivergence, and there is disagreement even within the community on various topics. So that is, if you are engaging with that kind of subject matter, you may have noticed that. So my experience is just my experience. So we're going to start with what does neurodivergent mean? So I have some notes here. I'm going to refer to them. Don't have a PowerPoint today. So you'll just have to listen, but happy to, again, answer questions, even by email afterwards if you have them. So we use the word neurodivergent to describe people who think, perceive, learn, and behave differently from neurotypical people. It's a strengths-based way of talking about folks who are autistic or have ADHD, Tourette's syndrome, dyslexia, and a range of other learning and neurological differences. And I'm going to refer to autism probably a lot throughout my talk, but a lot of what I say could and may apply to anyone who is neurodivergent, and indeed anyone at all who has some traits of neurodivergence. So we also hear the word neurodiversity. So we use that word to describe the range of brains that's all around us. So we, in this Zoom room today, are very likely a neurodiverse group already. And a person can't be neurodiverse. A person is neurodivergent, but a group can be neurodiverse, or a community can be neurodiverse, or a workplace can be neurodiverse. And I should add, and I didn't say this off the top, and I don't know why I didn't, but both of my children were late diagnosed, so in their teens. And as a result of that, and my own learning around that, and sort of looking back on my own life, I think I'm quite likely autistic myself. So that's kind of an interesting thing that often happens when children are diagnosed. Often the parents then come to that realization themselves along that pathway. So another word I want to talk about is neuroaffirming. So, historically and still today, we've talked about autism and other types of neurodivergence from a deficit perspective. So we've talked about what people can't do. We've talked about, ways that they need to be fixed. But today in the neurodivergent community, we don't really talk anymore about curing or even treating autism and other neurodivergences. Instead, we talk about acceptance and accommodation. And I'm going to get back to that a little bit more around identity and language and that kind of thing. So we now really want to move forward with an affirming approach. So finally, what is autism? Autistic people's brains process information differently. An autistic brain is actually physically different from a neurotypical brain, and autism is a neurodevelopmental disability. So here are some things that autism is not. It is not a mental health condition. It's a neurological condition. So many autistic people will also experience mental illness, particularly depression and anxiety, in addition to social and emotional differences that can affect their ability to communicate, work, study, and connect with others. So like other kinds of disabilities, the challenges of living in a world that does not understand you or accommodate you or accept you can often lead to mental health challenges like depression and anxiety. And in my own experience, certainly with my own family members and also, of course, my broader autistic community, autistic people in general, and neurodivergent people with ADHD and other divergences need to work very hard just to exist in the world every day, and to be understood and to feel accepted and to feel connected to other people. Autistic folks process sensory information differently. So that would be like all that input that's coming in for you through your senses. Autistic and other neurodivergent people actually will experience that sensory input differently. So they may be very sensitive to noises or lights or being touched, for example. I was at actually an art show last night at King's here in Halifax, University of King's College, and it was they've had a disability scholarship, like scholarship around disability lecture series there this winter, and this was their finale, and they had an art show with artists with disabilities, and one of them came up and did a talk with his support person, and the support person explained that he didn't like to shake hands or be touched, so that people in the audience afterwards, when interacting with him, would not touch him, because we tend to just touch people, right? So that would be a sensory difference. Excuse me. And neurodivergent people have neurodivergent social communication and interaction styles, and often have special interests and areas of expertise. So if any of you have neurodivergent people in your lives, particularly autistic people, you know all about special interests, and that often these folks have like very intense passions on very specific topics. And sometimes these passions can be like episodic, like for a few months, and sometimes they can last a lifetime. And autism and other forms of neurodivergence involve both advantages and impairments. So some autistic people consider themselves to be disabled and would say that they have a disability, and some don't. And finally, autism is vastly diverse, and other forms of neurodivergence as well. So once you've met one autistic person, we say you've met one autistic person. And there are some schools of thought, and there's some conversation now about how what we think of as like autism, ADHD, other sort of neurodevelopmental differences like that, like they're all in one bucket, but even just autism itself is probably many different conditions that presents in many different ways, depending on the person and depending on how it affects them. So this is why it varies so much from person to person. And I'll just like go off book for a second here and say and acknowledge that especially among autistic folks, the differences are so vast that you know, as you probably know, some autistic people have need 24-hour support and care, and need help with everything. And other autistic people might live very much like neurotypical people do. And but often those people, the ones that at first don't appear to be autistic, those people typically also need supports and accommodations as well. So it is vast, it is fascinating, and if you don't think you know anybody who's autistic, you're wrong. And certainly ADHD has come out of the closet a lot in the last probably 5 to 10 years, and which is wonderful. And autism is kind of following close behind. And if you want to actually understand more about autistic people, it's really important to ask and interact with autistic people. And I would also suggest social media can be a good resource for that. So there's a hashtag actually autistic that people use. So, you know, following some autistic creators and, you know, autistic adults and people with experiences and ADHD as well, to learn about their lives and you know, what is challenging for them, and also what they're good at and what their strengths are. So I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'll pause for a second in case there's any questions. And you may be wondering this, if you work in the disability space, that you've probably noticed that I'm saying autistic people instead of people with autism. So we tend to, in the disability space, use person first language. So person with a disability, a person who uses a wheelchair. But with autism in particular, many people in this community prefer identity first language. Not everyone, and it's important to ask if there's a particular person that you're working with or interacting with and it comes up. But most of the autistic people I know prefer to be called autistic people. And here's why. it's because being autistic is such a huge part of your identity and your personality and who you are, that to say, like I know that my kids would say, to say you're a person with autism would be like saying you're a person with gay, right? And we would never say that. And you would probably also never say, a person with African Nova Scotian heritage, for example. You might say that, but you'd probably say, I'm African Nova Scotian, I'm gay. So there are these identity markers, and autism is one of those. It is really a big part of who you are. Interesting aside, there's a huge overlap between neurodivergent folks and LGBTQIA plus folks. So there's a lot of overlap between those two communities, which is kind of fascinating. So that I will pause for a moment because I've been talking a lot and talking fast. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions so far? No, we're good. Okay. Little more sort of background information. Autism is common. About 1 in 66 children and youth is diagnosed with autism in Canada. And that's just kids who are actually diagnosed. Lots of families don't have access to formal diagnosis, and it also doesn't count adults. And a lot of adults are actually seeking diagnosis for different neurodivergent types of neurodivergence. And diagnosis costs thousands of dollars, and you could wait years for diagnosis through the public health or school systems. The Canadian Medical Association Journal tells us that 1 to 2% of the Canadian population is on the autism spectrum. So that's between about 400,000 and almost 800,000 Canadians. And I think that estimate is probably low, because especially if you're looking at adults, there are an awful lot of us out here living our lives undiagnosed and undocumented. And access to diagnosis is even more difficult if you're an adult. I often think that so autistic people have always been here. They've always been part of society. They've always played an important role in society. And I think that in, the next 20 years, neurodivergence is going to be kind of like being left-handed. Like whatever, is it 15% of the population that's left-handed? I think there's a substantial minority of the population that is neurodivergent in some way. And we're just now beginning to understand that and learn about that. And it's a normal part of human variation, right? Neurodivergence is not abnormal. And so it's a useful way to frame that when you're thinking about it. Autism can't be fixed, changed, or cured, but it can be accommodated and celebrated. Other types of neurodivergence like ADHD, certainly some people benefit greatly from medications for that. But it is part of who you are, and you have to work with it and not against it. An autistic person will always be autistic. It's as much a part of who someone is as having brown hair, being gay, or hating cilantro. Autism is a neurotype with its own social norms, culture, advantages, and disadvantages. And yes, there is autistic culture. And if some of you are familiar with like deaf culture, for example, which is like a highly developed culture of its own, capital D deaf, autistic culture is very similar. And there are, communities in which autistic people can feel like very comfortable and really be themselves. Another thing to know is girls and women are seriously underdiagnosed for social and historical reasons, and meaning that they often get even less of what they need to live their best lives. So autism is a spectrum. So we've all heard that, right? The autism spectrum, and officially the diagnostic name is autism spectrum disorder. But that doesn't mean, the spectrum doesn't mean that it goes from like not autistic at all to super duper autistic. It's much more nuanced and three-dimensional. So, we're not all a little bit autistic. Spectrum is complex, multidimensional. Autistic people have gifts, talents, abilities, as well as things they struggle with, just like anyone else. So sometimes this is a hard one to like really get people to understand, but every person, and we're all like this, right, has a unique constellation of abilities, challenges, deficits, strengths. And that is really true for people who have neurodevelopmental disabilities as well. And it's another reason why everyone with one of these diagnoses is totally unique. Autism is also what we call a dynamic disability. So I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but it means that someone's abilities and impairments interact in different ways at different times. So, and they can change from hour to hour, day to day, and throughout life, depending on the environment someone's in, what supports and accommodations they have, the stress that they're under, the pressure, the acceptance. So I'm trying to think of a good example of this. So when I think about in my own life and my own experience, so my younger kid, today, they might have had a good sleep. They might not be worried about anything. They might have gotten to spend like a lot of really good quality time with the cat this morning, so they're feeling relaxed. And therefore, they might be able to handle going to the doctor and then going shopping for shoes and then a family dinner that day. They might be able to handle that. That's a lot. But if they didn't have a good sleep, and something happened in the morning that was like maybe out of the routine, then maybe they'll only be able to do one of those things today. And it can be really difficult for autistic adults because it's really hard for most of us to understand that somebody, well, you could do that thing yesterday, why can't you do that thing today? But it is a legitimate, huge challenge for people with neurodevelopmental disabilities to how their capacity may change from day to day. I see a question and I am going to get to it. And it can be a challenge with employment. It can be a challenge when interacting with service providers, because for neurotypical people, it's a really tough thing to get your head around. Like, well, what do you mean you can't do this? And for my kids too, in my experience, and for a lot of people I know, if you were to have a conversation for 5 or 10 minutes with either of my kids, you probably wouldn't notice anything, right? Like they look typical and they can communicate in ways that pass for typical in a briefer interaction. But they both, even though they do really well in life, they both have a lot of struggles and need a lot of different kinds of accommodations and supports. So the question is, what are the schools of thought behind we are not all a little bit autistic? This is a casual thought that has some traction in the zeitgeist. Yes, it does, Stephanie. It's a good question. I mean, this is my inexpert personal view. I think it discounts and undermines the notion that autism is a serious neurodevelopmental disability for which people need help. So, and need accommodation and need support. So I think that when someone says, oh, we're all a little bit autistic, I think it's well meant. I think it's meant to be like, oh, we're all a little different. We all have little things that we struggle with. And that is true. But an autistic brain is a different brain. And everything about how you experience the world is different from that of a neurotypical person. Everything. And so how you process information is different, how that sensory input makes you feel is different, how you cope with that sensory input is different, how you perceive other people's communication is different, how you pick up on social cues is different. And actually, B, my kid says, we talk a lot about physical disabilities and intellectual disabilities and even mental health disabilities, but autism is a social disability in many ways, right? It really affects how you connect and interact socially with other people. And So I think, I don't know if that answers the question, Stephanie, but I think the reason why it's problematic is that it really discounts the experiences of people who actually are autistic or neurodivergent. Yeah. Okay, we're halfway in. I think we're good. So word on functioning labels. So we've all heard and still continue to hear, and even medical professionals will say, oh, he's high functioning, she's low functioning. So many people in the disability world now consider functioning labels inaccurate, ableist, and harmful. They essentially measure a human being's value against their economic worth to society, right? So are you functional enough to have a job, make money, fit in and be normal is essentially what that really, that's what that relates to. And functioning labels don't really give you a lot of information, right? So if you think about, I'll use my son as an example. Very organized. He's a legal assistant at a large law firm, completely independent, lives his life. And by all objective outside measure, would appear to be a very mature, successful young adult. But he also works very hard to accommodate himself, right? To make sure that he has what he needs to be successful at work. He advocates for himself. He has to have a certain amount of downtime every weekend. He has certain routines that help him to stay emotionally regulated. And it's taken him his whole life so far to figure that out. And that's why he does as well as he does on this, to how he's perceived to be successful on the outside by other people. But that doesn't come without a lot of work and a lot of background and a lot of like scaffolding that he does for himself. So to describe someone like a medical professional would probably describe him as high functioning, but he's high functioning because he has what he needs to be high functioning, right? And to do the things that we measure as a society, we use to measure success as a society. So my other child might appear to be, would probably be labeled by a medical professional to be high functioning. And what we really like to do now is use the word support, is to talk about support needs, right? So instead of saying high functioning, medium, low, we say, well, this person has higher support needs, lower support needs, moderate support needs. It's more accurate and it refers more to what the person actually needs to be successful. So on the surface, and I'm not telling you anything that my kids would not want me to tell you, by the way. They're very open about their experiences. And so B would probably like appear to be have low support needs. And most of the time that's true, but there are situations in which their support needs are moderate or even high. So the more autism friendly or neurodivergent friendly an environment is, the lower someone's support needs will be, right? And this really relates to the social versus medical model of disability, which, if you're not familiar with it, has to do with the idea that in the social model, much of what a person experiences as disability is caused by their environment and not being accommodated. So, and finally, and I'm sure you know this, but autism is sometimes a visible disability, but it is very, very often not a visible disability. And it's the same with ADHD and other forms of neurodivergence. You can't tell someone is neurodivergent by looking at them. And you can't tell how much or what kind of support they need by looking at them or even by briefly interacting with them. So finally, before I get into some like tips and so on, sorry, I'm a little sniffly today. I want to just say a word about what we call masking. So many neurodivergent people do something called masking. So they mask their neurodivergent traits in public often, and sometimes at home, depending on their home situation. And that's exactly what it sounds like. They work really hard to suppress their neurodivergent traits so that they can fit in with their neurotypical peers at work, at school, in the community. And most people who are neurodivergent do this, at least to some extent. This is partly because historically, up until very, very recently, autism in particular was treated as something that needed to be cured and essentially eradicated. So the goal was, if you had an autistic child, to basically make them not autistic, or make them at least appear to not be autistic. So the therapies that have historically been used, and you may have heard of ABA, applied behavior analysis, was really designed to help to make autistic kids not be autistic anymore. It doesn't work. It's sort of autistic conversion therapy. And someone, Lexi says, this is such a great point. Looking and labeling someone as high functioning really does a disservice to how much invisible work is being done. Yes, exactly. Knowing their support needs are identified allows them to take off the mask more often and not feel so defeated or exhausted by their performance. Well, thank you. I think I can go now, because this is exactly true. Absolutely. And so masking is exhausting, right? So you've given me a great segue, Lexi. Masking is exhausting. And there is sort of an expectation often that neurodivergent people will mask, will like pretend that they're okay to make other people feel comfortable. Because the truth is, many neurodivergent people are, they have what neurotypical people would perceive as eccentricities. They're different. They're a little weird, a little odd. They're eccentric. They're quirky. We use these kinds of words quite often. And so there's enormous pressure to fit in so that other people around you will be comfortable. And often masking leads to what we call autistic burnout or neurodivergent burnout. And it can be very serious. It can mean people can't work for long periods of time, can't attend school. That's certainly happened to my younger child. Experienced severe school burnout in high school. Oh my gosh, I have a cat in here and I didn't know that. All right, she may make an appearance. So, I think I want to go back to what I said a few minutes ago about autism being and other neurodivergences as well being dynamic disabilities. And I always say, just because somebody can do something doesn't mean they should. So, just because, so could a young person with sort of low to moderate support needs, could they work as a cashier at the superstore? Like, could they do it? Like, intellectually, physically? Yes. Should they do it? Probably not. Because what happens is you have an amount of energy that you start your day with. You go to work, you spend your day at work masking, trying to fit in, do the job, using an enormous amount of emotional and social energy just to survive. And then that's it. You're done. You have nothing else, right? You have no energy for family, for relationships, for hobbies, for social and emotional well-being. Yes, Lexi, the spoon analogy. Some of you are probably familiar with the spoon analogy, which is, you start the day with like 10 spoons. And as you go through the day, you use up, as you use emotional energy and intellectual energy, you are spending those spoons. And, for example, for my younger kid to have a full-time job, they actually would probably die of depression. And I am not exaggerating or being flippant. I think like that is not something that they will probably ever be able to do, because it would use too many spoons, and it would mean that they wouldn't be able to do anything that they enjoy, or refill their cup in any way. I was actually reading a book a year or two ago about the state of autism in the United States, written by an autistic journalist. And one of the people he writes about, she's a nonprofit leader of like a national like autism organization, and I forget what it was, and who is autistic herself. And so she runs a national organization as the executive director, but she has a full-time support person. who's with her all the time. Well, she probably has more than one, but she has somebody with her all the time. She does not cook her own food, do her own laundry, do her own shopping. People do all that stuff for her. Because if she had to do all that adulting, she couldn't do her job. She couldn't do anything else. So a lot of the time it's about like removing a barrier can look like removing some mundane tasks, not because the person can't do it, but because they shouldn't, because that is not a good place for them to put their energy. Does that make sense? Yeah. So before I go on, because we have a few minutes left and I have some tips, does anyone have any questions? Such a receptive and quiet group. Okay. So some things you can do. I have a little list here. And some of this is really easy to do. Processing that last thought. Yes. All right. Well, come back to it by all means, Stephanie, because as you can see, I could talk about this all day. So a lot of the stuff you can do is really good for everybody, like so many accessibility practices. So make space for and celebrate different brains. The next time you find yourself thinking this person is odd or weird or difficult or awkward, ask yourself if they simply have a different way of relating socially to others. Be curious and be patient. Don't assume that people are neurotypical unless they tell you otherwise. Be inclusive and don't expect people to disclose. And help them have control over the sensory inputs and pace of their environment. So in general, that's really good advice. Just like make it possible for people to have control over those sensory inputs. I have a quick story. My husband and I took B to dinner at the Lion's Head Tavern in Halifax. This is like several months ago. And it's in our neighborhood and we go quite often. And they had a flickering light. B's really sensitive to any like flickering lights. And we sat down, we were going to order, and B's like, at this light, I cannot deal with this light. And we actually would have had to leave. And the server came over, and we know her a bit because we go there a lot. And I said, listen, that light is flickering. Can you do anything about it? And she's like, oh my goodness. Oh, yes. And she runs off and they adjust the light. It's fine. We get to stay and have dinner. Right? Like it's really simple, really easy. Don't expect necessarily neurodivergent people to ask for help. This is a tough one because we're always like, well, you can just ask for help if you need it. But it can be asking and self-advocacy can be very difficult for neurodivergent people. Find ways to initiate check-ins and supports. Neurodivergent people will get more comfortable over time. And again, just be curious. Pay attention and be curious. Know that just because a person can do something today doesn't mean that they will be able to do that same thing tomorrow. What they can do or handle fluctuates depending on other stresses, demands, and what supports are available. Recognize that executive functioning, and I should probably define that. So executive functioning is all the sort of like the organizational skills and the planning and the time management and all those sort of meta skills that we use to manage our lives every single day. And trouble with executive functioning is a pretty key trait of neurodivergence. So recognize that executive functioning can be a huge challenge for neurodivergent people. This is not a behavior problem. So yes, it can be annoying when people are disorganized or late or having trouble keeping track of time. But it will not be solved with behavior modification. So for example, sometimes parents of neurotypical kids will say, well, I mean, if they can't, if your kid can't keep their room clean, then there have to be consequences and punishment, and then they'll keep their room clean. That isn't going to work with a neurodivergent person. Often if they are having trouble with a task, it's because they can't do it. Like they literally, their brain, and it's really hard to understand when you don't struggle with executive functioning, but there are going to be things that someone who struggles will just not be able to do and will need support with. So things like punishments and consequences are not going to work. What people need is patience and support. And you might have to try to support a colleague or to support a client or whatever. You may have to try a few different things to see what will work. Autistic people may appreciate you holding space for them to participate in conversations and join in with the group in ways that feel good for them. So it can be really hard for people with neurodivergent brains to keep up with a fast-paced group conversation. So their processing is sometimes a bit slower. So if you're all talking, everyone's, chatting and talking, and that person, by the time they can formulate their contribution, the conversation has moved on. So this is actually such an easy thing to do in work settings, is to just aggressively facilitate, right? And make sure that you're holding a bit of space, and even sometimes holding a little bit of silence, which can feel uncomfortable, so that people who take a little more time to process can process. So you can try like meeting and gathering approaches that explicitly give each person a chance to talk, like talking in sharing circles, passing some kind of object around, or if you haven't heard, I have a good comment here. And if you haven't heard from somebody in the room, you can pause and say, okay, Rachel, I haven't heard from you. Did you have anything you wanted to add? And Rachel can then say no, or Rachel can then have a moment to get her thoughts together and share something. So this is something I learned to do at the dinner table from like long before I ever knew my kids were autistic, because I could tell that one of them wasn't getting very much airtime. So I would have to like facilitate and make sure that they got a chance to participate in the conversation. So Rachel says, thank you for the comment about the tidy room. My son is neurodivergent and his room is never tidy. I'm sure it isn't. It's a good reminder for me to hear how to approach this. Rachel, you and I can talk. We should chat, because this is something that I have done a lot of work on myself. Yeah, but it's like in our case, like I spent a lot of years very frustrated with one of my kids about their room. And then I just realized one day they can't do it. They need me to help them with this, and that's okay. So now when we talk about, being an adult and like, well, you're just someone, you're gonna have a cleaner. That's going to have to be part of your budget. That's an accommodation and a support that you are going to need throughout your life, because this is just not something you can do. And that's okay. And as soon as I had that moment, I was like, oh, I wasn't mad anymore. And yeah. So, okay, Stephanie, my partner has 4 kids, 3 of them and him struggle severely with executive functioning. He's trying to help them build skills without drowning himself in the home among all of their tasks. Any tips? That's very simplified, but hopefully there's some general advice. How can they be prepared for adulthood? Oh, Stephanie, we should have it. We definitely need to have our own chat. I do have thoughts. It's probably not the time, but let's talk. Stay on afterwards and we'll chat for a minute. And Megan, there are apps to support organizational skills. Definitely. I can't think of any that come to mind, but sometimes apps can be helpful. I've heard, yes, for some people, there's tools, right? Like there's lots of tools, and some work, and for some people, some don't. I know for us, we've had to try lots of different things, and it's still definitely a work in progress in terms of the executive functioning, and keeping track. Like adulting, right? The adulting is really hard, and it's hard for all of us. And if you have a neurodevelopmental disability, it's like probably 10 times harder. Lexi, my mom has stopped visiting because she doesn't like that it's not a priority to me. Neurodivergent myself with 2 kids. Yeah, lower my standards and lower them again. We eat the elephant one, but yeah, that's right. That's right. And I love that you talk about standards, Lexi, because we tend to think, because we don't really examine it, but that somehow standards are objective, that there's some objective standard that we all have to meet, right? But there isn't. Success looks different for different people, and sometimes you just have to let go of things that aren't important, like the bedroom. Like, yeah, whose needs are being met? Like the bedroom thing, and this may be something you notice at work. Like you might be thinking right now about colleagues, like, oh my God, so and so's office, I wonder about this, right? Like for some people, it's just not important. And a lot of this is about really asking yourself whose needs are being met and why is this thing important? Why is this thing, this standard or this rule or this, whatever this bar is, why is it actually important? You know? And often the answer is no. And can this be accommodated? But we have a lot of ideas about what people should be able to do. And, uh, I've often thought, like, if I had two children with like cerebral palsy or intellectual disabilities, or I think a lot of the people in my life throughout my life would have um, been like, oh, Erin, wow, you work so hard, and this must be really challenging, and isn't this wonderful? And but the experience has been more, not that I don't have supportive friends, I do, but it's really hard for other people to understand from the outside looking in why we do what we do and why we live our lives the way we do. But it works for us. So it can, like, this kind of stuff can definitely feel lonely. And I see that in some of your comments. So I see you. I see you. Let's see. There are also programs available for young people to support them with executive functioning. Definitely. Achieve at NSCC. Yeah, my friend's son did that program and loved it. Is inclusive post-secondary that teaches people with intellectual and developmental disabilities life skills. Yeah, it's like a 1-year sort of education and life prep program. Yeah. No, I know a couple of people who've done it, and I think it's really good. They have some nice videos on their website about the program as well. Yeah, Lexi, is it affecting their functionality, or do they seem okay working in that environment? Yeah, are they meeting basic tasks, showing up every day? What are their strengths? How can you body double with each other to pair off strengths? Body doubling, that's a nice one. Do you want to say what that is, Lexi?
I'll just unmute myself for a second. Yeah, body doubling is essentially just having somebody there, and it kind of holds you accountable for what you're trying to do. So
Yeah.
my girlfriends will often make fun of me because if I need to fold laundry, I'll ask somebody to come over and just talk to me. And just having that person there kind of as a mirror, or just kind of to distract my brain from the boring task.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you like a coworker, you're noticing that their office is a mess and you're wondering why, perhaps you could just go in and chat with them, and you may find that they start tidying up or doing those mundane tasks because they have that person in the room there to kind of spend time with them and hang out with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm noticing people putting in some different ideas, and it's very interesting that we've kind of gone on this little tangent. Let me get through my tips because we have a few minutes left, and then we can come back. I was going to say, Lexi, I have a friend who body doubles via Zoom with a friend in Europe regularly, and they don't even interact. They're just both working, or they're both doing other things. But for one of them, it's extremely helpful just to have the company of the friend there. So, okay, this sort of adds on to where we got a bit distracted here, which is also a very neurodivergent thing. Don't be afraid of pauses in conversations. We call it buffering. Like, so my good friend's son is autistic, and sometimes I take him to things, and I drive him places, and you can have a great conversation with him, but you can ask a question and then you could sort of count to 3 or 4 before he answers, which doesn't sound like much, but it feels like an eternity in a conversation, right? And when I first started spending time with him, at first I was like, and then I realized, oh, no, I just need to give him like 3, 4, 5 seconds, and then he'll answer. So we call it buffering. Really important concept. If you leave here with nothing else, behavior is communication. So what we've been taught to think of as autistic behaviors or ADHD behaviors often, and they're often defined as problematic, meltdowns, shutdowns, that kind of thing. They're usually an expression of an unmet need or even distress or trauma. So if something like this happens in your workplace, be curious and patient, or at home. Give the person space, ask if you can call someone to help. Don't draw a whole bunch of attention to the person. Often people just need a little bit of time to calm down and settle down. And then try to figure out what that unmet need is. Know that each neurodivergent person is different and has different needs, desires, and aspirations, just like all of us. And we are each experts in our own needs. And don't treat neurodivergences as disorders that need to be treated or cured or fixed, but as disabilities and differences that can be supported, accommodated, and appreciated. So just a couple more points, and then we have a few minutes to talk, and I can hang around for a bit. Autistic folks want pretty much, and neurodivergent folks want pretty much the same things that anyone else does. Love, belonging, fun, gossip, education, work, money, sex, junk food, and someone to go to IKEA with. And when you allow for different kinds of brains to belong and take part, you open up all kinds of possibilities to solve problems, make art, shape systems, and build relationships. And like all accessibility practices, including neurodivergent folks, benefits everyone. And someone says here, buffering makes it so hard to participate in group conversations. Absolutely. And so I think I brought that up a few times throughout this talk, that like, I know, especially for B, that is a huge, like, B is an incredible conversationalist one-on-one, or in a group of 3 if they know the people well. But any more than that, and participating in a conversation becomes very, very difficult unless they are accommodated consciously by the other people. And I think so many people get left out, and so many ideas go unheard because we don't give people even a tiny bit of time. We don't give people even a tiny bit of grace. So someone says, yes, oh, here's another, Megan's posted another community employment program through Autism Nova Scotia. Yeah, they also have a really good program for like people transitioning to post-secondary. There's lots of good stuff there. I think one thing I want to say too is, like, often autistic adults, and these could be people that you work with or that you know in your community, they get left out of social life in many ways. And it's partly due to things like the like buffering. Partly it can be due to just having different social skills. Like, we call them autistic, because we used to teach autistic people social skills, and now it's like, no. Autistic people have their own kind of social skills, and they might be a little different or unusual, but lean in, be curious, get used to it. Like, autistic people are fascinating. People with ADHD are fascinating. And they often, in fact, I would say always, have something to bring and something to offer to your life, your work, your social situations. But it's the kind of disability, it's really interesting, like through the disability support program provincially, you have to have a physical disability, an intellectual disability, and there's also some provisions for mental health disabilities. There's literally, these are literally nothing that, say, my kids would fall into here. Nothing. So there's a whole sort of swath of people out there, and often neurodivergent adults, autistic adults, for whom there are very, very few services and accommodations, and there's very little understanding. So we're really at the beginning of this. But if some of you can walk away today with some ideas and thoughts and inspirations, I would be really happy. So thanks for coming, and happy to answer a few questions. Yes. You're welcome, Megan. And like I said, I could be on this soapbox all day. Stephanie, stick around or reach out after if you want. Yes, Rachel, like drinking from a fire hose, right?
Does anybody have any additional questions they'd like to ask Erin? We just have a couple more minutes, but we can keep this conversation going for a little bit longer.
Roxanne, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Is this going to be made available as a recording?
Yeah, so it is
Perfect.
recording, and we'll be adding it on our Municipal Ideas website, and I'll also include it in our next bulletin, because these are some great conversations and resources that we can share with everyone.
Yeah, I think I'd like my husband, who's not a municipal employee, I'm going to share this with him and encourage him to listen to what was said today.
I actually did a lunch and learn for the counselors at NSCC a few weeks ago. on which this one is based. So I already had some stuff prepared, and so it's interesting that the NSCC stuff came up as well.
Mhm.
Like I said, I'll talk about this to anyone who will listen.
And we just like to express our sincere gratitude and your insight on this Lunch and Learn today. Your session really provided us with valuable knowledge and practical strategies that will improve not only our communication, but all services and approaches for individuals, neurodivergent individuals, but also for everyone, which is really important. And what resonated with me was like just the simple modifications we can do within like everyday life. These are some like great tips and some great resources that we can embed into our everyday life just to make life easy for everyone. And it can also improve our experiences and our interactions with people as well. So thank you for sharing and helping us becoming more equipped with to serve all members in our community.
Thanks for having me.
And so yet again, this will be recorded, and this recording will be at our Municipal Ideas website in the Lunch and Learn section. Thank you so much for attending our Lunch and Learn, and we hope to see you folks next week. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great day. Just gonna stop recording.